I volunteered for this. That's what I kept reminding myself as Marcus and I picked our way through the tangled deadfall that littered the trail. We were fresh out of SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, graduates trained to understand these woods better than anyone else, and eager for hands-on experience. But enthusiasm wanes quickly when reality hits you like a gut punch. The Five Ponds Wilderness had a reputation, a kind of dark respect among the older forest rangers stationed in Wanakina and Cranberry Lake. I'd seen the knowing looks they exchanged when Marcus and I signed up for the inspection. Bear Mountain's abandoned lookout tower and its battered cabin were little more than scribbles on outdated maps now. A forgotten place, buried by time and snow. Locals said that in winter, when heavy snow blanketed the Adirondacks, something screamed through the woods, echoing down the empty valleys. The stories seemed foolish by daylight, but as the light dimmed and the trail faded, foolishness became easier to believe. "Tyler, hold up," Marcus said from behind, breathing heavily. He was red-faced, panting clouds into the frigid air. "This trail sucks." "Tell me something I don't know," I said, forcing a laugh. My own breath fogged my glasses, blurring the already indistinct path ahead. "We gotta be close." We pushed forward, the snow deepening underfoot, hiding slick roots and jagged rocks. Every few steps, branches whipped at our faces, stinging our skin. It felt like the forest itself resisted our approach. By late afternoon, as the last faint glow slipped below the treetops, we finally spotted the tower. The rusted metal framework loomed above us, skeletal and twisted, as if years of harsh winters had bent it toward surrender. Beneath the tower was the cabin, an old log shelter covered in thick layers of moss and ice. One wall sagged inward, another wore a blanket of fresh frost. No fire had warmed it in decades. "Home sweet home," Marcus muttered, slinging off his pack. I forced open the swollen cabin door. Inside, the air tasted stale, musty. We shuffled in, kicking snow from our boots, eyes adjusting to the gloomy interior. A rust-stained stove sat against the far wall, its pipe disconnected. The bunk beds were warped, the wood gray with age. Marcus flicked his flashlight toward the lower bunk, pausing suddenly. "Look at this," he said quietly. Beneath the bunk, deep scratches marred the floorboards, long gouges like something had clawed its way desperately through solid wood. Behind the stove, a dark stain, dry and flaky, smeared upward. Marcus knelt, squinting. "Is that blood?" "Probably animal blood," I said, though I felt the unease in my voice. "Bear, raccoon, something nesting here." "Yeah," Marcus agreed quietly, but neither of us moved. Our words hung limp between us. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the cabin's brittle walls. A gust shrieked briefly through the cracks, echoing weirdly off the metal tower above. Marcus laughed nervously, standing quickly. We unpacked silently, setting up sleeping bags and laying out gear. We attempted the satellite phone several times, but it was useless, blocked by thick pines and shadowed peaks. Snow started falling again, slow flakes drifting lazily through the fading evening. "I'll check outside," Marcus said abruptly, sounding overly cheerful. I knew him well enough to understand he was trying to shake off the tension building inside this cramped, darkening shelter. I nodded. "Be quick." He stepped outside, the door closing heavily behind him, muffling the growing wind. I stood alone in the silence, rubbing my chilled hands, staring again at those claw marks beneath the bed. Deep, frantic slashes that seemed to scream out a story I desperately did not want to know. Then I heard it. A distant sound filtering through the trees. It wasn't wind. This was different. Something alive. Something between a howl and a scream. Impossibly distant yet piercingly clear. My blood ran cold. The door swung open abruptly, Marcus's face pale and drawn. "Did you hear that?" he asked breathlessly. "Yeah," I said, throat tight. "What was it?" Marcus shook his head slowly, gaze locked into the swirling snow behind him. "Nothing," he said finally, voice hollow. "Nothing at all." The words sounded empty, even to him. But neither of us argued. We simply closed the door, locked it tight, and sat in silence, listening to the wind rise and fall, pretending that whatever we had heard was gone. Outside, darkness settled over Bear Mountain, burying the abandoned station beneath a thickening blanket of white. When I woke up, Marcus was gone. My eyes struggled open to gray, frigid daylight seeping through gaps in the old cabin walls. I sat upright, immediately feeling the chill. Something was wrong, deeply wrong. Marcus's sleeping bag was ripped wide open, the torn fabric spilling across the floor. His boots still stood by the stove exactly where he'd left them. His jacket hung untouched on a rusty hook by the door. "Marcus?" My voice echoed hollowly against cold logs, unanswered. I climbed out of my sleeping bag, heart thudding. Ice-cold boards numbed my feet as I quickly dressed, pulling on boots, gloves, coat. I moved toward the door, bracing myself. Maybe he'd stepped outside for firewood or to relieve himself. Maybe I was panicking over nothing. I pushed the cabin door open and my stomach dropped. Outside, the snow lay perfectly smooth, undisturbed. No tracks led from the cabin, no sign Marcus had ever left. The air was silent and utterly still. A strange kind of silence, thick enough that it seemed to press against my ears. "Marcus!" I shouted louder this time. My voice carried, bouncing between snow-heavy branches. Nothing answered but the quiet rustle of my own breathing. I circled the cabin carefully, checking every side for footprints. Nothing. The snow was unbroken and pristine, as if he'd simply vanished from existence. My hands shook as I scanned the tree line, desperate for movement, a flash of color, anything that might signal Marcus. There was only emptiness. Desperation grew sharper in my chest. I grabbed our satellite phone again, fumbling with numb fingers. No signal. The screen mocked me, dead and useless. Helplessness quickly turned to anger, then back to fear. My mind raced. Marcus couldn't have gone far barefoot, could he? The idea was absurd. I climbed the lookout tower, hoping for a better view. I gripped each icy rung, my gloves sliding dangerously. Wind bit at my face, cold and relentless, making my eyes water as I reached the top. But looking out over the endless snow-covered forest, I saw no movement, no trace, only gray and white, stretching forever beneath clouds heavy with another storm. A sudden wave of dizziness forced me back down the ladder. Back on solid ground, I leaned against the cabin wall, breathing heavily, eyes tightly shut. Calm down, I thought. Think. Marcus was smart, resourceful. Maybe he'd heard something and went to investigate. Maybe he'd become disoriented. But barefoot, without his coat. The afternoon dragged on as I forced myself to expand my search, shouting his name until my throat burned. The temperature continued dropping, the air sharpening painfully with cold. Panic clawed at my chest. If I didn't find him soon, he'd never survive the night out here. By the time dusk began draining color from the sky, exhaustion forced me back to the cabin. I barricaded the door using the old bunk frames and the remains of furniture inside. As darkness fell completely, I lit the stove with our dwindling supply of kindling. Shadows danced wildly against the walls, deepening the cracks and gouges in the wood. Those gouges drew my attention again. I knelt, studying the floor closely. Something about the scratches felt intentional, urgent. One set of marks was deeper than the others, carving almost completely through the board, as if something had desperately tried to break free, or reach something buried beneath. A noise outside snapped my head upward. Thump, heavy, slow, thump, thump. My heart hammered painfully. I turned off my headlamp, sitting absolutely still, listening. The sounds circled the cabin, measured steps crunching through snow. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide its presence. I gripped the handle of the old Forest Service hatchet we'd brought along, my knuckles aching. The thumping paused briefly, and I held my breath. Every muscle locked rigidly. After several unbearable minutes of silence, I slowly exhaled, thinking whatever it was had moved away. Then with a force that shook the entire cabin, something slammed hard against the outer wall, directly behind my head. I bit my tongue, suppressing a scream. Another slam followed, then another, rattling the timbers. Each impact sent shock waves of terror through my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, unable to move, unable to think clearly. The assault continued for minutes that felt like hours, and then, abruptly, it stopped. The cabin went silent again. Only my shallow, ragged breathing broke the quiet. I sat frozen, staring at nothing, as dawn finally crept through the boarded windows. Slowly, I stood, joints stiff from fear and cold. Hands shaking violently, I pried the barricade away from the door and opened it, peering out into pale morning light. The snow lay untouched, utterly smooth and unmarked. No footprints, no sign of anything living having been there at all. I stepped outside, feeling disconnected, numb. Movement at the top of the tower drew my gaze upward. There, fluttering softly, caught in a rusted support beam, was a scrap of fabric. Marcus's parka, ripped and dangling like a macabre flag. Its torn edges were stained dark red, and clinging to one corner was a single coarse strand of gray hair. I stared upward, a fresh wave of nausea rising inside me. Marcus hadn't vanished. He'd been taken. I had to get out. After finding Marcus's torn parka, something shifted inside me. Panic gave way to a cold, numbing certainty. If I stayed another night in this place, I would disappear too. I spent the morning dismantling the bunk beds, prying the ancient boards apart. My hands, already raw from cold, splintered and bled as I fashioned a crude sled. Tent poles provided bindings and frame. Twine and rope lashed tightly around warped wood. The final product was ugly and uncertain, but it was my only hope. The snow was waist-deep and soft. I'd never make it back without something to carry my gear. Around midday, I shouldered my pack, secured the sled, and started back down the trail, or what I hoped was the trail. With each step, my legs sank heavily into the snow. My breath came raggedly, misting in clouds around me. The path forward felt endless, swallowed by white drifts that blurred into featureless woods. As darkness crept closer, I gathered branches and pine needles, digging a shallow depression beneath the shelter of a fallen tree. I lit a small fire with shaking hands and one precious flare, warming my numb fingers and fighting exhaustion. The smoke rose straight into the empty blackness overhead. That night, lying half buried in snow and hidden by my makeshift camp, I listened. Silence, then footsteps, steady. Something was moving nearby, just beyond my circle of firelight. I curled tighter into myself, gripping my hatchet hard enough to bruise my palm. The steps circled slowly, methodically. They drew close enough that I could hear snow crunching beneath heavy weight, yet I saw nothing. No figure, no shadow, only the oppressive darkness. It stopped again, lingering, waiting. I didn't sleep, I didn't move. Eventually the footsteps faded into the distance, leaving only the faint crackling of my fire and my own shallow breathing. Morning came slowly, the sky a dull, oppressive gray. My eyes burned from exhaustion as I stood, surveying the untouched snow around my camp. No tracks, no proof anything had been there, yet I knew better. I trudged onward, pulling the sled, every muscle aching from cold and fatigue. My vision blurred at the edges, shapes shifting between trees. Hallucinations began. Shadows took form, dancing figures of smoke and snow, flickering just beyond my focus. Each time I turned my head, they dissolved. That afternoon, movement among the trees stopped me cold. Ahead, partly obscured by branches, stood a figure. Human-shaped, but far too tall, thin and ragged, limbs unnaturally long. It remained motionless, watching. I felt its attention like a physical weight, suffocating, freezing me in place. My heartbeat pounded loudly, the only sound in a suddenly airless forest. I forced myself to look away, staring down at my boots, counting my breaths. When I dared look up again, the figure had vanished into the pale emptiness. I continued forward, legs barely cooperating, each step slower, heavier. By nightfall, my strength was gone. Shivering violently, I huddled beneath an evergreen, too weak to build a fire, too numb to care. My thoughts spiraled inward, fading into incoherent murmurs. I woke sometime deep in the night to a voice calling my name. Tyler. It sounded close, clear, not whispered, but spoken plainly, without warmth or breath behind it. And though every instinct screamed at me not to, I raised my head toward the sound. Marcus stood there, illuminated dimly by reflected moonlight. He waved gently, smiling as if nothing were wrong. "Marcus!" My voice cracked painfully, but something was off. His face was wrong, thin, stretched, his eyes hollow and dark. When his smile widened, I saw teeth that did not belong, sharp and uneven. I staggered upright, terror flooding me with adrenaline. Marcus's figure shifted suddenly, blurring into darkness, becoming tall and twisted, limbs too thin, too long. It advanced slowly, silently, through the snow. A scream lodged in my throat. I turned and fled blindly through the trees, lungs burning, tears freezing on my cheeks. I ran until my legs collapsed beneath me, until my chest heaved so painfully I thought I would die. I crawled forward, mind slipping further into delirium. All around me, shapes shifted, whispered my name, beckoned from shadows. I squeezed my eyes shut, crawling forward inch by inch, my world reduced to numbness and fear. When I awoke again, a bright light blinded me. Voices shouted, human voices. Hands lifted me onto something loud, mechanical. Snowmobiles. Rescuers from Cranberry Lake, bundled heavily, speaking urgently. Their words came muffled, distant, relief mingled with confusion, but my strength was gone. Days later, I found myself in a hospital bed. Doctors and nurses moved silently around me, careful and gentle, never asking too much. They whispered about hypothermia, frostbite, dehydration, but avoided mentioning Marcus. I refused to speak, my tongue too heavy, memories too raw. I stared blankly at the ceiling, waiting for the numbness inside to fade. But it lingered, relentless, and in the emptiness I heard Marcus's voice again and again. One night, as a nurse gently adjusted my IV, I finally forced words out, speaking softly, flatly, without looking at her. "It wasn't hungry," I whispered. "It was lonely." She froze briefly, then continued her work in silence. I didn't explain, knowing somehow she understood. People around here knew, they'd always known, even if they never spoke of it. I turned away, closing my eyes again, trying to push away the memories of Marcus's empty smile beneath the endless snow and dark trees.